Hello folks. If I can just get your attention for 2 seconds. So we're just going to begin. My name is Ryerson. I'm the VP Equity at the Ryerson Students Union. And I'd like to thank all of you for coming today. At the beginning of all of our events, we do 2 things to sort of set the tone. And the first is acknowledging the land that we're on. So as most of us are settlers on this land, it is our collective responsibility to pay respect and to recognize that this land is traditional territory of the Mississauga and the New Credit First Nations. And we are here because this land was occupied. In recognition that this space occupies colonized First Nations territories and out of respect for the rights of Indigenous people, it is our collective responsibility to honor, protect, and sustain this land. And we read an equity statement to sort of set the tone. We're going to be having a lot of really great discussions, and we're all here to sort of further progressive movements, whether that's the student movement or the labor movement. So student union solidarity is based on the principle that all members are equal and deserve mutual respect and understanding. As members of the Students' Union, mutual respect, cooperation, and understanding are our goals. We should neither condone nor tolerate behavior that undermines the dignity or self-esteem of any individual, creates an intimidating, hostile, or offensive environment. It is our collective responsibility for creating an inclusive space for discussion and dialogue. All forms of discrimination and harassment will not be tolerated, nor will hate speech rooted in, but not limited to, anti-Muslim, anti-Arab, anti-Semitic, classist, racist, ableist, or homophobic or transphobic sentiments and or remarks. We have an obligation to ensure that an open and inclusive space free of hate is established. If you're not here in understanding in good faith, you will be asked to leave. Okay? All right, so I'm just going to hand over the mic to Winnie.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Yeah, I'm trying to sound hopefully would improve as we proceed. My name is Winnie. I'm the CAW, Canadian Auto Workers, Sam Gindin Chair in Social Justice and Democracy, the only unionized endowed chair across the University of Canada. That's a qualified ad. So on behalf of our Ryerson Social Justice Week Working Group, I want to welcome you, all of you here, to the first of our Lunch and Learn series during this week. The theme of this week is rebuilding the we. This is what solidarity looks like. And it's part of the reason why we came up with that theme is recognizing that there's too much going on with the neoliberal agenda, the austerity agenda, that is trying to very much to divide workers between unions and non-union, dividing workers between Canadian-born and those who are new immigrants and coming in as migrant workers and so on and so forth. But there's also that sense that, that we need to find new ways to overcome the politics of divisions and the politics of fear. And so part of the theme for this Lunch and Learn in particular, to highlight the race to the bottom, the Canada's low-wage labor strategy, is part of that whole process in saying, as well as saying that we need to engage as a rising community, both students, faculty, staff, along with the larger community, on more critical discussion on what are the strategies. We know how bad things are in terms of layoff, in terms of precarious work, but how do we overcome, how do we come up with strategies that can push back and counter that? And so we have a great panel, and later I'm here just to do the welcoming and the introductions. And part of the reason we have the Social Justice Week for this week, October 7th, and just for your information, October 7th is also the World Day for Decent Work. And when in this climate, when things are so tough and there's a rise of precarious work, a lot of us don't even, people are losing that audacity and the courage to even ask for good jobs, asking for decent work for all. And we have this panel, and along with the other Lunch and Learns this week, is part of that pushing back and saying, no, we're going to take a different stand and ask for decent work for all. So with me here today, I just also want to acknowledge Kathy Crow, who is a newly appointed distinguished visiting community practitioner with our faculty of art as part of the graduation day. And before I turn the mic, I'd also like to acknowledge and bring Harold Bowder, Director of Ryerson Center for Immigration and Settlement, to come up and say a word of welcome. The center is also part of co-sponsor of this event.
Thanks, Winnie. I would like to welcome everyone on behalf of the Ryerson Center for Immigration and Settlement. The center has been in operation for a bit over 2 years now, and so this is our third year. And in these bit more over 2 years, we've been working hard for social justice. We've been organizing conferences and events and co-sponsoring events like this one. We also have a working paper series and research briefs. One copy or a few copies are available on the table if you're interested. There are also flyers about the center. And we're very grateful that Winnie approached us to co-sponsor this event, because for us migration researchers and for us at RCIS, we think that migration is really at the heart of that race to the bottom in the labor market. We are seeing that there are temporary foreign workers that are being denied very basic rights that everybody else takes for granted when they enter the labor market. Temporary foreign workers, for example, they don't have the freedom of choice of occupation or employer. They don't have the right to bargain, and these are very important. This is a situation that aggravates the race to the bottom. Other immigrants are denied the recognition of their foreign credentials and of their foreign experience. They're required to demonstrate something like Canadian experience to have that in order to enter the labor market and perform in it according to their skill levels. And then there are other immigrants that are illegalized and criminalized, and then with it they're being denied a whole range of different rights: political rights, economic rights, social rights, all of the rights that non-immigrants often take for granted. And some people might think it doesn't affect them because they're not immigrants, but I think these people should think twice, because they are being asked to lower their own standards to compete in the labor market, where policies and various institutions and mechanisms are adding a layer underneath the labor market to undermine the kind of labor standards that we already have. So I think this is at the core of the race to the bottom. Now the question is, how do we stop the race to the bottom? And we think we need to stop competing with each other, especially not pitting immigrants and migrants against non-immigrants. We need to stand in solidarity, and we need to insist that all of us receive more, not fewer rights. So now I'm looking forward to the panel and being enlightened on how we can stop the race to the bottom.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I forgot to say it earlier. For the Social Justice Week, we involved the organizing of all the campus unions, administration, and the broader community. This year, unfortunately, we regret to announce to you that we are removing CISA, the union representing part-time students, as one of the official co-sponsors of the week, on the basis that what they have done as of September 21st, they locked out their 2 unionized employees, member of QP 1281. And the president of QP 1281, Sarah, is here. And I'd like just to bring up Estefina to say a few words. Part of it, when we talk about decent work and when we talk about solidarity, is having that courage to take a stand and say, some of these actions by management to lock out employees is not acceptable, and it runs contrary to the spirit and the principle of social justice. So, Estefina.
Hi everyone, good afternoon. My name is Estefania Toledo, and I'm a student rights coordinator for CSER, and also a proud member of QP 1281. As of September 30th, my employer locked out its unionized staff after walking away from the bargaining table. They were asking for major concessions. They were asking for us to roll back our wages to 2008 rates, as well as removing a full-time position from the bargaining unit. These things we felt were really unacceptable. My employer is an employer that believes in promoting the minimum wage campaign for $14, but actually pays its part-time staff $11. This is an employer that says that services will not be disrupted for students during the lockout, but last week was the health and dental plan opt-out date, and the office was closed. Students were actually going to the Ryerson Students Union for help. So, it's really shameful because the student union should be working together with its workers. We should be actually working together to provide services. We should be working together to, bring events like this to campus. But instead, the student union is fighting with its workers. So we're asking the Ryerson community for support. Please send Caesar a strong message to come back to the bargaining table to let its employees back to work. We are so humbled and as well as have so much gratitude for Social Justice Committee as well as for Winnie for showing their support. Please send an email to Shanae Kim. She's the president of Caesar, and her email is president@mycaesar.ca. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Now I'd like to call on, just to introduce Dina. For nearly a 2-decade, Dina has been in the forefront in improving wages and working conditions for primarily immigrant workers, workers of color, and generally low-wage workers. Dina is a coordinator of the Workers' Action Center, one of the key champions in the minimum wage campaign, and also, like to say, she's a former graduate of our Ryerson School of Social Work. Dina. Hi, everyone. Before, Winnie, you walk away, I just wanted to say that when I saw the topic of the panel, I can't think of anyone more than Winnie in the labour movement and in the social justice movement who's working tirelessly to make sure that just fight against the low-wage strategy that has not been sort of going on for the last 5 years, but for the last many, many, many decades. And I know when I started getting involved, over 20 years ago, that she was one of our mentors and leaders in the labour movement and still is. So I just wanted to say thank you to Winnie, and there's got a t-shirt and some flowers for her, because it's always important to acknowledge the incredible work that she does. No, she expected me to do that. So yes, because it's amazing to see the incredible events happening this week, and a large part of that is to do with Winnie's leadership on campus and in the broader movement. So it's very important to acknowledge that. Just wanted to also say, as you are probably looking at the panel and wondering where Debbie Douglas is, she had an urgent meeting to attend and wasn't able to make it. And I believe there is going to be someone from Okazi here, but I don't see Amy's, but when she comes, we will introduce you to her. So let's get going. So as Winnie said, I'm the coordinator at the Workers' Action Center. We are an organization that works with and supports many workers who are dealing with their rights being violated at work, who are not part of trade unions, or unions are not part of traditionally what's thought of as the trade union movement. But many of our members who have been directly impacted by low wages, by precarious employment, by temp work, contract work, unstable jobs, violations of rights, not being paid what you should be entitled to, have joined in with the labour movement and are fighting for many struggles, for temporary agency workers' rights, for the minimum wage campaign, for migrant workers' rights, for a lot of issues to really combat the low-wage strategy that we're all being impacted by. And so I think that what's really important about the panel today is that, normally the issues facing migrant workers are separated from the rest of us. Those of us who may be privileged to have Canadian citizenship or have been born in this country, or maybe, you know, are immigrants like myself, but now have got citizenship. And so what we try to do in this conversation is we put people in pockets, and we don't recognize the continuum of precariousness and low wages that affects us all. And I think through this panel, what you'll see is the kinds of conditions and low wage issues that are affecting many workers, whether you have citizenship, whether you have status, whether you're undocumented, whether you're a student, whether you're an older worker, whether you're an immigrant. We have to build the connections here. The kinds of deterioration of labor standards and conditions that are affecting all of us has greatly increased, and I think it's incredibly important to know that as we continue along that continuum of precariousness, that migrant workers are part of that continuum. And if we don't make the links between the issues that we're facing in our workplaces to the kinds of conditions of low wages and absolute exploitation that migrant workers face, then we're really missing a huge strategy in that, you know, in the fight back that we have to do. And so I think that for those of us who are involved in struggles around improving working conditions, it's vital that we make the connections to immigration, that we make the connections to what's happening at the federal level, and how workers are being brought into Canada with no status, with absolute flexibility. But then those of us who are working around immigration and those of us who are working around migrant workers and around social justice need to ensure that we are making connections to the massive growing number of workers in this country who have no access to labor rights because they can't speak up at work because they'll get fired. And this speaks to the absolute lack of enforcement of basic rights in our workplace. And again, the growing deterioration of wages. So, without further ado, I'm going to introduce Trish Hennessy, who's our first speaker. She's the director of the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives. And the CCPA is a progressive, non-partisan think tank. And for the past year, Trish has directed the Centre's national project examining income inequality in Canada. She's a former newspaper journalist and has a BA Sociology from Queen's University, a BSW from Carleton, and an MA in Sociology from OIC, University of Toronto. And Trish has been an incredible support, I know, for the Workers' Action Centre and the Minimum Wage Campaign, and it is a fantastic communicator, so I'm really happy that she's here with us today. So please give a warm welcome to Trish.
So I'm going to commit a little sociology today, if you'll bear with me. It's a pleasure to be here today, and I do want to thank Winnie for sparking the conversations that she is sparking throughout this week, because it's these kinds of conversations that are essential if we're actually going to make social change in Canada. I'm going to start off very briefly with an overview of the backdrop. What's the trend behind Canada's race to the bottom? So I'm going to talk about income inequality, because income inequality is really the river that runs through it all. So the main thing that you need to know about income inequality in Canada is that it's been getting worse. And it's getting worse in good times and in bad economic times. And that's different. Before, what you used to see is that during a recession, the gap between the rich and the rest of us would grow because people would lose jobs, and so they would fall to the bottom of the income scale. And then we'd recover from recession, people would get jobs again, and the gap would narrow. But what we've noticed over the past generation is that the gap just keeps growing. It's in a one-way direction. It keeps getting worse. And so I want to talk a little bit about what's driving that trend. So this is a picture picture of market income. This is what people working in the labor market are getting paid. And it shows market income for Canadians from 1980 to 2009. So this blue bar represents the richest 20% in Canada. And so you see over this time period that their income grew by 38%. That red bar on your far right is the poorest 10%. And over this same time period, 1980 to 2009, their market income dropped by 11%. So they're in the red. And then in the middle, what you see that line? You can really take a look. That's what's been going with the middle 20% of income earners in Canada over that time period. So essentially, that's a story of stagnant wages, of flatlining. And so the story of what's been going on in the middle, and when you hear about the middle class squeeze in Canada, it's about stagnant wages. It's about it takes 2 income earners in a household to make it in the middle these days. And families are actually working longer. They're working on average 200 hours more a year just to get by. We live in one of the 2 worst provinces for income inequality in Canada. Recent Statistics Canada data show that when it comes to the gap between the richest 1% and the rest of us, that Alberta has the biggest gap and Ontario has the 2nd biggest gap. Now let's take a look at what's been happening to the richest 1% from 1982 to 2010. Over that period, their income grew by 71%. So not bad, right? So let's look at what happened to the incomes of the bottom 90%. So for 90% of Canadians, over that same time period, their income grew by 5%. And we have data that shows over the past, over the year following the recession, from 2009 to 2010, the bottom 50% of Canadians, their income grew by only 3%, so barely keeping up with the cost of living. So that's the dynamic that's going on. What we're seeing is, even when the economy grows, even as we're growing the economic pie, the share of those income gains are going more and more into the hands of the few.